struck on the head, strangled with a cord, a blade drawn across his neck, then placed face down in a pool of black water and left to sink. 3 wounds, 3 methods, 1 death. For over 2,000 years, a body lay in a peat bog in the English countryside. The acid in the water turned his skin to leather. The cold stopped the bacteria. The moss pulled the calcium from his bones and replaced it with tannin. His face survived. His fingernails survived. The contents of his last meal survived. And when they found him in 1984, the police were called first, because his face looked so fresh that everyone assumed it was a recent case. It was not modern, but it was not an accident either, and the question of why this man met his end has never been fully answered. For over a century, scholars believed bog bodies were criminals or outcasts thrown into the swamp and forgotten. DNA says otherwise. They were fed special meals, their nails were manicured, their beards were trimmed, they were prepared, not punished. And in 2025, a new discovery in Northern Ireland added an astonishing chapter to the story. A body that everyone assumed was a teenage boy turned out to be a young woman, decapitated, throat slit, thrown into the bog roughly 2,300 years ago, the latest victim in a pattern of ritual practice that stretches across Iron Age Europe. This is the story of the man in the bog, how he died, what he ate, what his body reveals about a practice so disturbing that modern science is still struggling to understand it. In the summer of 1984, workers at a commercial peat cutting operation in the northwest of England were feeding blocks of peat onto a conveyor belt when one of them noticed something in the dark soil. A piece of skin attached to a foot. The police were called. A detective arrived and immediately treated the site as a crime scene. The skin on the foot was pink. The tissue was intact. Every indication pointed to a recent death. In fact, the case seemed to have an obvious suspect. A year earlier, a skull had been found in the same bog, just a few hundred meters away. A local man had confessed to disposing of his wife's remains in the peat decades earlier. The police assumed this new find was connected. It was not. The skull belonged to a woman, the body belonged to a man, and radiocarbon dating placed his death between roughly 1900 and 2000 years ago during the late Iron Age, around the time Rome was invading Britain. The body was excavated by archaeologists from a nearby museum, working alongside forensic pathologists. They removed the remains in a single block of peat weighing nearly a ton and transported it to a laboratory for examination. What they found inside was extraordinary. The body was preserved from the waist up. The skin had turned the color of dark leather, stained by centuries of tannin from the bog. The internal organs were flattened, but intact. The brain had shrunk to roughly a quarter of its original size, but was still present inside the skull. His face was recognizable. His beard had been trimmed 2 or 3 days before death. His fingernails were smooth and manicured. His hands showed no signs of heavy manual labor. This was not a laborer. This was not a farmer. Whoever this man was, he had been cared for. His body showed the grooming standards of someone who was either wealthy, high status, or being prepared for something. His hair was cut short, darkened by the bog acids, but originally light brown or reddish. He wore no clothing, but a strip of fox fur was found tied around his left arm, the only personal item recovered. He was roughly 25 years old when he died, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, healthy, no visible disease, no malnutrition. And he had been struck down 3 times. The forensic pathologists catalogued the injuries in the order they were most likely inflicted. First, 2 heavy blows to the top of the skull, delivered with a narrow, blunt instrument. The strikes fractured the bone and drove fragments into the brain. Either blow alone would have been enough. Second, a thin cord made from animal sinew was wound tightly around his neck and twisted with a stick or small wooden toggle. The cord cut into the skin and crushed the throat, breaking one of the neck vertebrae. This technique, known as garroting, would have ended consciousness within seconds. Third, while the cord was still tight, a sharp blade was drawn across the right side of his neck. The wound was deep, precise, and deliberate. This was not a frenzied attack. This was controlled. 3 methods, 3 separate actions, each one decisive on its own. Together they form a pattern that archaeologists call the triple death. This is not a term invented for one body. It appears across Iron Age Europe. Multiple bog bodies found in Denmark, Germany, Ireland, and the Netherlands show the same pattern. 3 injuries delivered in sequence using different methods. Blunt force, strangulation, a blade. The consistency suggests a ritual procedure, not rage, not punishment, not warfare, a ceremony. The contents of his stomach provided the next clue. He had eaten his last meal roughly 2 hours before death. The food was a flatbread or gruel made from barley, wheat, and other grains. Mixed into the grain were traces of mistletoe pollen. Mistletoe was one of the most sacred plants in the religion of the Celtic peoples who inhabited Britain and much of northern Europe during the Iron Age. Roman writers described Celtic priests, known to the Romans as druids, harvesting mistletoe with golden sickles from the branches of oak trees, treating it as a plant of immense spiritual power. The presence of mistletoe in his stomach does not prove he was sacrificed by druids, but it places his death within a world where plants had sacred meaning, and where a final meal might not be food at all, it might be a sacrament. The bread also showed signs of having been deliberately scorched. One face of the flatbread had been blackened by fire. This detail connects to a specific ritual described in later Scottish and Irish sources, where a bannock, a round flat cake, was prepared and one portion deliberately burned. The pieces were distributed, and whoever received the burned piece was chosen as the sacrifice. Whether this exact ritual existed in 1st century Britain is impossible to confirm, but the scorched bread in his stomach matches the pattern with uncomfortable precision. His death came in late winter or early spring. Pollen analysis of the stomach contents confirmed the season. This timing places his death near the Celtic festivals that marked the transition from winter to the growing season, a period when the powers of the natural world were believed to be most dangerous and most in need of appeasement. The combination of a groomed body, a sacred meal, a seasonal killing, and a triple death, performed with precision and control points overwhelmingly toward one conclusion. He was not a victim of random violence. He was an offering. Now consider the question that forensic science alone cannot answer. Why him? His manicured nails and trimmed beard suggest he was not a prisoner or a criminal condemned to death. His body showed no signs of restraint or struggle before the killing. His hands were clean. His muscles were not those of a man who worked the land. Some researchers have proposed that he was a willing participant, a man who understood his role and accepted it, perhaps a member of the community who had been selected, possibly by lot, possibly by the burned piece of bread, and who submitted to the ritual knowing it was necessary. Others have proposed that he was a figure of high status, perhaps a minor king or chieftain, sacrificed because the community believed the power of the gods required a life of high value, not a criminal or a slave, but someone whose loss would be felt by everyone. He died around the time the Roman legions were pushing into the northwest of Britain. The world he knew was under threat, Fields were shrinking as the bog expanded, the climate was turning wetter and colder, and a foreign army was approaching from the south. Environmental studies of the bog itself confirm that the peat was growing rapidly during this period. Land that had been farmable a generation earlier was turning to waterlogged marsh. For a community that depended on the land, the bog was not just a landscape feature. It was a living, growing threat, swallowing their fields year by year. A Roman writer who observed Celtic practices firsthand described communities offering human sacrifices during times of war, plague, or agricultural failure. He wrote that the Celts believed the gods demanded a life in exchange for a life, and that the most effective offering was a person of high value, not a criminal or a slave, but someone whose loss would be felt by the entire community. In that context, a ritual offering at the boundary between the known world and the waterlogged unknown, at a bog that was neither land nor water, neither living nor dead, begins to make a terrible kind of sense. The bog itself was the altar. For decades, the man in the bog was studied in isolation. A single body, a single moment, a single act of violence preserved by accident. But he was never alone. Over 2,000 bog bodies have been found across northern Europe, from Ireland to Scandinavia. Dozens show the same combination of ritual killing and careful placement. In Denmark, a man found in 1950 still had the rope around his neck. The expression on his face was so peaceful that the first witnesses described him as sleeping. He had been hanged and placed gently in the peat. His last meal was a porridge of cultivated and wild seeds, eaten 12 to 24 hours before death. In Ireland, a man found in 2003 was over 6 feet tall. His nipples had been cut. His fingernails showed no signs of manual work. A gel made from vegetable oil and resin had been applied to his hair, a product imported from southern France or Spain, meaning he had access to long-distance trade goods. He had been stabbed, his nipples sliced, and a hazel rod pushed through his upper arms before he was placed in the bog. The cutting of nipples in Iron Age Ireland may have had a specific political meaning. Later Irish texts describe a ritual in which subjects demonstrated loyalty to a king by sucking his nipples. Cutting the nipples may have been an act of decommissioning, stripping a ruler of his authority before he was given to the gods. For decades, historians believed these were isolated acts of violence. DNA says otherwise. The pattern spans centuries, crosses national borders, and appears in communities that had no direct contact with each other. The triple death, the sacred meal, the groomed body, the placement in water. The ritual was not local, it was continental. And in January 2024, police in Northern Ireland excavated a new bog body near the village of Ballymacombs. Initial analysis said it was a teenage boy, aged 13 to 17. Radiocarbon dating placed the death between 2,300 and 2,000 years ago. 1 year later, in February 2025, the results were corrected. Advanced osteoarchaeological analysis revealed the body was female, a young woman aged 17 to 22. Her throat had been cut. She had been decapitated. She was thrown into the bog. She is now known as the Ballymacombs More woman. She is one of the rarest finds in European archaeology, a confirmed female victim of Iron Age bog sacrifice. The majority of bog bodies from this period are male. Her discovery challenges the long-held assumption that only men were chosen. Cut marks on her neck vertebrae confirm the method, a blade drawn across the throat, the head removed, the body placed in the water, the same pattern, the same method, separated by 2,000 years and 400 miles from the man in the English bog. but the ritual is recognizable. The formula is the same. These are not random killings. They are not crimes of passion. They are products of a system, a religious practice that persisted across Northern Europe for centuries, possibly millennia, in which certain individuals, selected by criteria we may never fully understand, were killed in precise, controlled, multi-step rituals and given to the water. DNA analysis of bog bodies remains one of the greatest challenges in forensic archaeology. The acidic environment that preserves skin and organs dissolves bone and degrades genetic material. To date, no full genome has been recovered from any major bog body, but technology is advancing. In 2024, researchers at the University of Copenhagen announced progress in extracting fragmentary ancient DNA from remains preserved in acidic environments. If the technique succeeds on bog bodies, it will finally answer the most basic questions about these individuals. Where were they born? Were they local or outsiders? Were they related to the communities that offered them? Until then, we are left with what the bodies themselves can tell us. A man in an English bog, 25 years old, groomed, fed a sacred meal, struck on the head, strangled, throat cut, placed face down in dark water, left there for over 2,000 years. A woman in a Northern Irish bog, 17 to 22 years old, throat slit, decapitated, placed in the peat, left there for 2,300 years. For over a century, scholars believed these were outcasts, criminals, exiles. DNA says otherwise. Their bodies were prepared, their deaths were controlled, they were not thrown away, they were given to the water, to the gods, to whatever the people of that world believed lived in the space between land and darkness. The bogs of Northern Europe are still giving up their dead. Every decade, another body surfaces. Every body carries another piece of the answer, and every answer leads to the same uncomfortable question. What kind of world takes its best groomed, best fed, most carefully prepared members and places them in the water as a gift? The man in the English bog has a name now. The museum where he rests calls him by the name of the place where he was found. Visitors file past his darkened face in a dimly lit gallery. His skin is the color of old leather. His beard is still visible. His expression, if you can call it that, is neither peaceful nor agonized. It is simply still. He has been staring at the ceiling of a glass case for over 40 years. Before that, he stared at the bottom of a bog for over 2,000 years. He never chose to be famous. He may have chosen to die. We will never know. But his body, preserved by the same water that was meant to receive him as an offering, has become the most important piece of evidence in a cold case that spans all of Iron Age Europe. Discovery continues. Thanks for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover DNA mysteries, ancient forensics, and the cases history tried to forget.